I never planned to tell this story out loud. For a long time, I thought silence was dignity, that keeping things private meant I was strong, but betrayal doesn't stay quiet. It lingers in small moments, in unanswered questions, in the way your heart tightens when someone you love walks into a room. What happened to me didn't start with shouting or obvious lies. It started with routines, with trust, with a marriage that looks stable from the outside. This is a story about how an office affair became public, but more than that, it's about what happens inside a woman when the truth slowly removes the blindfold. I didn't seek revenge and anger. I waited, I watched, and I learned that sometimes karma only needs space to work. I used to believe silence was loyalty, the kind that kept a marriage steady even when things felt off. Mark and I had built our life around predictable routines that made everything feel safe. We woke up at the same time every morning. I made coffee while he checked the news on his phone. We talked about bills, work deadlines, weekend plans, nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. When he started staying late at the office, I told myself ambition had finally found him. I even felt proud at first. He's working hard, I told my sister once. It'll pay off. But ambition doesn't change how someone looks at their phone. One night, while we sat on the couch watching a show we both pretended to like, I noticed the way his thumb hovered before replying to messages. I noticed how he angled the screen away from me like a secret he didn't want reflected back. Everything okay? I asked casually. Yeah, he said too quickly. Just work stuff, I nodded even though my stomach tightened. I didn't want to be that wife, the one who questions every move, so I stayed quiet. Silence felt safer than doubt. At a company picnic a few weeks later, I met Lena, his project lead. She was polished and confident, the kind of woman who seemed comfortable in every room. When Mark introduced us, her smile lingered just a second too long. She laughed easily at his jokes, even the ones that weren't funny, and she touched his arm like it was familiar territory. So you're the famous wife, she said. I guess I am, I replied, forcing a smile. Mark laughed. She's the real boss at home. Lena tilted her head. I can see that. I felt small for noticing these things, smaller for questioning my own reaction. I told myself I was being insecure. That night I asked Mark how the picnic went. Fine, he said. Just work people. Lena seems nice, I added carefully. She's professional, he replied, avoiding my eyes. Weeks passed and the late nights became normal. He'd text running late or meeting went long. I'd reply okay and reheat dinner. Every time he walked through the door, I studied his face for clues. He still kissed my forehead. He still asked about my day, but something had shifted. One evening while folding laundry, I heard his phone buzz in the other room. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to cross that line. Instead, I listened to the quiet of our house and realized how loud it felt. Then, one afternoon, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. No subject line, no name, just a single attachment. My hands shook as I opened it. The photo was clear and unforgiving. Mark and Lena were inside a glass-walled conference room after hours. The office lights were dim, the city reflected behind them. Their reflections were tangled in a way that left no room for excuses. Oh my God, I whispered to myself. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. My heart raced, but my face stayed calm. I didn't scream, I didn't call him. I sat there breathing slowly, letting the truth settle into my bones. When Mark came home that night, I watched him more closely than ever. Hey, he said, dropping his keys. Hey, I replied. Long day, he added. I can imagine. He leaned in and kissed my forehead, the same gesture he'd done 1,000 times before. Then he went to shower. I stood alone in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I didn't confront him, I didn't cry, I watched, I listened. Over the next few days, every late night added weight to the truth pressing on my chest. I noticed how he changed clothes in the bathroom instead of the bedroom. I noticed how he took calls outside. Who was that? I asked once. Just a coworker, he said. Anyone I know? Not really. Each answer felt rehearsed. I began to understand that betrayal doesn't announce itself. It waits for you to be quiet enough to hear it. One evening, as we ate dinner, I asked, Are you happy, Mark? He paused. Why are you asking that? I'm just curious. Yeah, he said slowly. I'm happy, I nodded, even though I knew it wasn't true. That night, lying next to him in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of the last few months. The laughter at the picnic, the phone angled away, the photo burned into my mind. I realized silence had protected him, not us. And as Mark slept beside me, unaware of the storm forming quietly inside me, I made a decision. I would no longer use silence as loyalty. I would use it as observation. Because if the truth had waited this long to show itself, I was done looking away. Proof changes everything, but the way it arrives feels slow, creeping into your life in pieces you almost don't want to see. After the photo, I stopped hoping I was wrong. The truth began leaving footprints everywhere, small and telling, like crumbs only someone paying attention could follow. One evening, Mark left the shared tablet on the kitchen counter, forgetting to log out. I hesitated, staring at the screen, heart hammering in my chest. Then I opened it. Calendar invites labeled budget review, always with Lena, always after hours. Messages scheduled for late at night, notes about catching up on the project, excuses thin as paper. I felt my stomach twist. I didn't respond. I didn't call him. I just let it sit there, proof glowing on the screen like a spotlight. The next day, a coworker I barely knew sent me a quick message, "Are you okay?" Then unsent it before I could reply. Confirmation doesn't always come with a dramatic reveal. Sometimes it comes quietly, in hesitations and vanished words. That weekend, I invited Mark to dinner at our favorite place, the one we went to when celebrating promotions, anniversaries, or minor victories in life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply placed the photo between our menus and stared at him. His fork clattered against his plate, and the restaurant's soft background music seemed to swell in my ears. He stared at the image, then at me. I can explain, he said, face pale. I want to hear it, I replied. It was a mistake. Do you call this a mistake? No, I mean it shouldn't have happened. It's over, then why are the meetings still scheduled? I asked calmly. I don't know, he stammered. You do know or you don't want to tell me. It's complicated, he said, almost pleading. I nodded slowly. Everything is complicated when truth is avoided, isn't it? He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Mark, I just want honesty. I am honest, he snapped, then softened. I messed up, I admit it. And Lena, it's done, yes, done. I let the silence stretch, letting his words sink into the space between us. The next morning, the office erupted. The group chat exploded with screenshots, leaked emails, late-night messages, expense reports. It wasn't just a rumor anymore, it was undeniable. The office whispered. HR seemed unusually busy. I watched Mark wrestle with the chaos. He came home furious, not ashamed, dragging his frustration across the floor like a weight I was meant to feel too. You never warned me, he said, pacing. I didn't have to, I replied quietly. I can't believe this, how could you? Mark, I didn't create this, I said, keeping my tone even. You did? He stopped, staring at me as if he could read some secret in my eyes. You're going to ruin me, he accused. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just letting the truth speak. He laughed bitterly. The truth, you think it's that simple? Yes, I said softly, it is. In the days that followed, Mark tried to salvage his image at work. He sent emails, called colleagues, tried to apologize and explain, but every message, every explanation seemed to fracture under the weight of evidence. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance, silent and patient. I realized confronting him hadn't ended anything. It had opened the door to something far slower, far more deliberate. I began making small mental notes, watching patterns, listening to conversations he thought I wasn't a part of. Even in casual remarks, in the way Lena's absence left an awkward gap at work, the pieces of the puzzle were assembling themselves. At home, he returned to routines as if nothing had changed. He poured coffee in the morning, made small talk, kissed my forehead at night. But I noticed the difference in his gaze, how it darted, how it hesitated. I didn't confront him anymore. I didn't ask questions I already knew the answers to. Instead, I started to plan, not in anger, not in haste, but in careful consideration. I spoke to colleagues subtly, listening more than speaking. I let HR inquiries proceed without interference. I let small slips in his story, minor inconsistencies, pile up unnoticed by anyone else but me. One evening, I caught him standing by the window, phone in hand, staring blankly at nothing. Something wrong? I asked. Nothing, he said, voice tight. Your hands don't look like nothing is wrong, I said. He swallowed hard, nodded, and put the phone down. I didn't follow, I didn't pry. I let it sit, simmering. The quiet became a tool and patience became my weapon. Then came the message from HR he hadn't expected, the one he tried to ignore. We need to meet about discrepancies in your reports. Discrepancies? He asked me later, panic threading his voice. I've seen some emails, I said. Perhaps they're just catching up. His eyes narrowed. You knew. I know enough, I replied. And you will see soon enough. As the days passed, Mark's world began to shift without me lifting a finger. Colleagues glanced at him differently. Meetings were rescheduled without him. Lena had disappeared from the office entirely. Her resignation supposedly voluntary, but her name lingered like a shadow. Mark came home exhausted, shoulders slumped, asking questions that had no easy answers. Why does it feel like everything is falling apart? He asked one night. Maybe because it's not built on honesty, I replied. He said nothing, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time, I noticed a flicker of real fear in his eyes. I realized then that revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it unfolds quietly, as the truth pulls the walls from around someone who built their life on lies. I sat beside him that night, sipping tea and let the quiet envelop the room. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to push. Every action, every slip, every small confession had begun to carve a path that I could follow to the ending I wanted, not from anger but from justice. And as Mark drifted to sleep, I knew the slow, deliberate part of my plan had just begun, leaving him unaware that the game was already in motion. The next morning, as he left for work, he kissed me on the cheek and said, "I'll fix this." "I know you will try," I said, calm as ever. "You're not mad." "I am," I replied softly. "But patience is stronger than anger." He frowned, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You'll see," I said, letting the words hang. "You'll see soon enough." Every glance, every conversation, every meeting he attended without me present became part of the pattern I was observing. The evidence accumulated like shadows lengthening at dusk, unnoticed but inevitable, and I knew that the moment of confrontation, real confrontation, would be mine to control. Not in a shouting match, not in tears, but in a quiet revelation that left him unable to deny the weight of his own choices. The whispers at work grew louder. The office, which once felt like a place of neutral ground, had become a stage. I could see Mark's unease growing in small gestures, tightened jaws, hesitation before speaking, hands rubbing his temples in thought. I didn't gloat, I didn't taunt. I let him navigate the unraveling alone, while I built my foundation of proof, patience, and observation. And as the week drew to a close, with Mark still trying to maintain appearances and I still calculating every move, I realized that silence and patience were more powerful than any argument I could have made. The next step of this slow, deliberate plan was about to begin, and Mark had no idea that what felt like chaos to him was actually carefully orchestrated inevitability. The game had changed, and I was no longer a passive observer. I was ready to see how far his choices would carry him before the consequences caught up entirely, and the truth, once exposed, would not stop at just humiliation. The cliffhanger lingered in the quiet kitchen that night. Mark didn't know yet that every small misstep, every hidden message, every lingering glance would soon be laid bare in a way he could not ignore. Revenge didn't look like shouting or walking away. It looked like patience, quiet observation, and a plan that unfolded like a shadow creeping through the cracks of a house. I let Mark scramble to save his image at work while I moved silently behind the scenes, gathering knowledge, connections, and a careful understanding of how his life was built on both lies and complacency. I reached out to an HR consultant recommended by a friend, someone I could trust to guide me without interference or bias. "You're not doing anything illegal," she said, "but timing and precision are everything. Let them do the work for you and let their rules become your ally." I took her advice seriously. I learned about workplace policies, conflicts of interest, and the length of time investigations could take when documentation was complete and airtight. I made notes, timelines, and quietly collected emails, expense records, and witness statements, never touching Mark's phone again, relying only on what had surfaced publicly. Mark, meanwhile, was oblivious to the extent of my patience. He tried to regain control, to smooth over relationships with colleagues, to convince people his marriage troubles were personal and unrelated to his professionalism. I encouraged him to tell his side, knowing every carefully worded explanation would be measured against evidence I had compiled. I asked casually one evening, "Do you want to be honest with HR this time?" "I'm always honest," he said with a nervous laugh. "Then why do I keep seeing discrepancies?" I asked calmly. He stuttered. I didn't notice, it's nothing." "Nothing," I said, watching his face carefully, "because it looks like more than nothing." He ran his hands through his hair. I don't want this to ruin everything." "Then start with the truth," I said softly. Lena resigned first, framing it as a personal decision, and left behind whispers and questions that circulated quickly through the office. Her absence was a small but telling void, like a door left ajar. Mark tried to reconcile at home, cooking dinners I barely touched, leaving apology notes on the counter that expired in the morning, notes that were no longer addressed to the man I had once trusted. One evening he asked me, "Do you think I can make this right?" "Make what right?" I asked. "Everything, my career, us, everything." "Do you even see what you've done?" I asked quietly. He looked away. I thought I was being careful. "You thought wrong," I said, "and now you're paying the price of your choices." Then the twist arrived. HR called him in, not about the affair itself, but about falsified reports tied to the late meetings he had with Lena. The very behavior he thought was hidden under the guise of work scrutiny was now being examined under bright fluorescent lights, documented and undeniable. He came home pale, hands trembling slightly, and asked me, "Do you know anything?" "I know enough," I said. "I know enough to stop lying to myself." He sank onto the couch. I can't believe this is happening." "You created this," I said. "I just waited. I didn't think anyone would notice," he whispered. "Notice." People always notice when choices have consequences, I replied. That night our house felt like a courtroom. Every tick of the clock sounded like a gavel. We sat in silence, the kind that feels heavier than any argument. Mark asked, "Would you stand by me if I lost everything?" I didn't answer. "Why not?" he pressed. "Because this isn't about you anymore," I said. "It's about truth." As the days passed, the investigation deepened. I saw colleagues glance at Mark differently. Notes and emails were scrutinized. Tiny mistakes he had made over weeks suddenly felt monumental. I watched him struggle, struggling to appear confident while knowing deep down he had no defense against the meticulous documentation that surrounded him. One evening he asked, "How did you know about all of this?" "I pay attention," I said. "I don't need to dig, I just notice." "You're terrifying," he said quietly. "I'm not trying to be," I replied. "I'm just choosing not to ignore it." I encouraged small confessions at home, subtly prompting him to reveal things he had hoped would remain hidden. "Did you submit those reports?" I asked one evening. "Yes," he said. "Did you double-check everything?" "I thought I did," he admitted. "Thought that's not enough," I said. He ran his hands over his face. "I can't believe I'm explaining myself like this." "Then maybe it's time to accept the consequences," I said softly. The tension at home mirrored the tension at work. I let Mark wrestle with fear, shame, and the small humiliations of professional scrutiny. I never gloated, never mocked. My revenge was deliberate, patient, and careful. I let him believe he could recover, but every misstep was quietly noted, every inconsistent statement catalogued. I watched him try to regain a sense of control, then watched him falter as the consequences of the choices he thought were private began to emerge in public. One evening he came home, voice tight with anxiety. "I think they're going to suspend me," he said. "Maybe," I replied, "or maybe you'll survive. The choice is in how honest you are now." "I can't," he whispered. "I can't fix this." "You can't fix what you won't face," I said. The final day before the HR review was filled with an almost unbearable tension. I sat in the living room, reading quietly while Mark paced. "Why are you so calm?" he asked, frustration and fear blending in his voice. "Because the truth doesn't need panic," I said. "Truth doesn't hurt. It hurts everyone equally," I replied. "Except those willing to pay attention before it's too late." He sank into the couch, silent, realizing that no amount of pleading or excuses would change the path that had already been set. And as the evening drew on, Mark sat across from me, finally quiet, finally aware that my patience had outlasted his recklessness. The twist, the unexpected turn of HR scrutiny, had revealed more than mistakes. It revealed who he truly was when no one else was watching. I remained calm, observing, letting the slow, deliberate process of accountability unfold around him. The cliffhanger at the end of that week. Mark didn't know how far the consequences would reach, how deeply the fallout would affect his career and reputation, and I was ready to witness it all. Letting karma and the careful planning of truth do the work I had begun. Karma doesn't rush, but it doesn't forget either. The office moved on quickly after Lena resigned, but the whispers lingered, following Mark like a shadow he couldn't shake. HR's investigation concluded, and Mark was terminated, not directly for the affair but for falsified reports and policy violations exposed because of it. The reality hit him like cold water. He walked into the house one evening, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, and asked quietly, "Was this your revenge?" I looked at him and shook my head. "No," I said. "This is what happens when choices meet daylight. I didn't do this to you. You did it to yourself." He didn't respond, just sank onto the couch, running his hands through his hair, the weight of his actions finally settling on him. I felt no triumph, only a strange sense of calm. For weeks I had observed, waited, and let the consequences do their work. Now I could breathe. The house, once tense with quiet, felt lighter, and the anxiety that had been a constant companion finally loosened its grip. I filed for separation that same week, not out of anger but clarity. I needed to reclaim my life not as Mark's wife but as someone who refused to be defined by betrayal. "Do you really want this?" he asked one evening, voice almost pleading. "Yes," I replied softly. "It's the only way I can be true to myself." I thought we had time," he murmured. "Time doesn't fix lies," I said. "Truth does if we're willing to face it." I began to rebuild routines that nourished me rather than drained me. I slept without questions, woke without dread, and found small joys in quiet things. A walk in the morning light, a hot cup of coffee on the porch, a book I could read without distraction. People still whispered about the scandal, about the affair, and about the fallout, but I no longer carried it. It wasn't my burden anymore. It was a lesson in awareness, patience, and the inevitability of consequences. Mark tried to reach out after a few weeks, leaving notes and sending messages, but I no longer engaged in the game of apologies or excuses. I had learned that revenge doesn't have to destroy someone to be real. Sometimes, it is enough to step aside and let the truth and the consequences walk forward on their own. Do you hate me? He asked once, voice quiet over the phone. No, I said calmly. I just don't fear the consequences anymore. I reflected often on the woman I had been, the one who ignored early warning signs, who rationalized away feelings of unease, who protected silence over honesty. That woman no longer existed. The affair had exposed more than a secret. It revealed who I became when I refused to protect lies. I became vigilant, patient, and unafraid. I became someone who could watch betrayal unfold and still retain dignity, someone who understood that justice doesn't always roar. It often arrives quietly, meticulously, and without fanfare. People asked me if I ever regretted waiting, if I ever wished I had confronted him earlier. I didn't. My patience had allowed me to observe fully, to understand, and to act without passion clouding judgment. And in that quiet observation, I discovered a profound truth. The person who betrays will eventually encounter consequences, even without anger chasing them. Karma is subtle, but it is inevitable. As I walked through my home, each room filled with sunlight and the faint aroma of coffee, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. Mark's betrayal, once an unbearable weight, had become a mirror reflecting the life I now chose to live, truthful, self-respecting, and free. Justice, I realized, wasn't about revenge or destruction. It was about allowing choices and actions to speak for themselves. My life didn't end when the affair became public. It began anew, grounded in honesty, self-respect, and the courage to choose myself over deception. I understood finally that betrayal is painful, but it also teaches endurance, discernment, and patience. I had learned to let the truth act as my ally, and in doing so, I had reclaimed the power that had been quietly stolen by lies. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I lived knowing that sometimes the strongest revenge is simply living well, beyond the reach of deceit and manipulation, and allowing the world to align itself in its natural justice. Ease settled into my life, not loud or dramatic, but deep and unshakable. I woke each day without fear, without doubt, and without pretending that everything was okay. I had learned that revenge, when paired with patience and insight, doesn't require spectacle, it requires clarity. And in the quiet aftermath, I finally felt free, knowing that life could continue and that I had emerged whole, wiser, and unafraid. The moral lingered in every choice I made after that. Betrayal will always find its way to daylight, and sometimes the most profound justice is the one you witness quietly without interference, letting consequences do their work naturally. Thank you for listening to my story. Betrayal can feel like a storm, sudden and all-consuming, but it also reveals who we truly are when faced with impossible choices. I learned that patience, observation, and letting truth take its course are more powerful than any immediate reaction. Revenge doesn't always need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, deliberate, and deeply effective. Life after betrayal can be peaceful, even if it begins with pain. Choosing yourself, protecting your dignity, and allowing consequences to unfold naturally can bring closure stronger than anger ever could. Remember, the people who betray will eventually face the results of their choices, and karma has a way of reaching everyone, whether quickly or slowly. This story is a reminder that the strongest justice often comes from calm strength, not confrontation.